all had the same rules. The first candidate spoke for 1 hour. The second candidate spoke for an hour and a half. The first candidate then had a half-hour rebuttal. We will join the debate after Mr. Lincoln has initially spoken. Mr. Douglas is giving his reply. We will then hear Mr. Lincoln close the debate with his rebuttal. It's my pleasure at this time to introduce to you Senator Stephen Arnold Douglas.
My fellow citizens, my good friend Mr. Lincoln has addressed you with his usual artless sincerity, his pure homely charm, and his perennial native humor. He's devoted a generously large portion of his address to most amicable remarks upon my fine qualities as a man, if not as a statesman, for which I express deepest gratitude. But at the same time, I most earnestly beg you not to be deceived by his seeming innocence, his carefully cultivated spirit of goodwill. For within each of his little harmonies lurk concealed weapons. Like Brutus in Shakespeare's immortal tragedy, Mr. Lincoln is an honorable man. But also like Brutus, he's adept at the art of inserting daggers in between an opponent's ribs, just when said opponent least expects it. Behold me, ladies and gentlemen. I am covered with scars. Mr. Lincoln makes you laugh with his pungent anecdotes. He draws tears from your eyes with his dramatic pictures of the plight of the black slave labor in the South. Always he guides you skillfully to the threshold of truth. But then as you're about to cross it, he diverts your attention elsewhere. He never, by any mischance, speaks of the condition of labor in the North. Perhaps he's ignorant of the fact that tens of thousands of workers are on strike. Hungry men marching through the streets in ragged order, promoting riots because they are not paid enough to keep flesh upon the bones of their babies. What kind of liberty is this? And what kind of equality? Mr. Lincoln harps constantly on this subject of equality. He repeats over and over the arguments of Lovejoy and other abolitionists, to wit, that the Declaration of Independence having declared all men free and equal, thus Negro equality is an inalienable right. Contrary to this stands the verdict in the Supreme Court case of Dred Scott. Mr. Lincoln is a lawyer, and therefore I presume he knows that when he seeks to publicly destroy the integrity, the inviolability of the decisions of the Supreme Court, that he is preaching revolution. He has asked me to state my opinion as to the Dred Scott decision, and I answer him unequivocally by saying I take all of the decisions of the Supreme Court to be the law of the land, and I intend to obey them as such. Nor will I be swayed from that position by all of the rantings of all of the fanatics who preach racial equality and who would ask us to vote, eat, sleep, and marry with Negroes. And I further say, let each state mind its own business and leave its neighbors alone. If we'll stand on that principle, then Mr. Lincoln will find that this great republic will exist forever, divided into free and slave states. And we can go on, as we have done, increasing in wealth, in population, and in power until we shall become the envy and admiration and terror of the world. My friends, I am in favor of preserving this government as our fathers made it. It does not follow by any means that because the Negro is not your equal or mine, that hence he must necessarily be a slave. On the contrary, it does follow that we ought to extend to the Negro every right, every privilege, and every immunity that he is capable of enjoying, consistent with the good of society. When you ask me what these rights are, what their nature and extent is, I tell you that that is a decision which each state of this union must decide for itself. Illinois has already decided the question. We have determined that the Negro shall not be a slave within the limits of our state. But we have also decided that the Negro shall not be a citizen within our state, that he shall not vote, hold office, or exercise any political rights. I maintain that Illinois, as a sovereign state, has the right to thus fix its policy with reference to the relationship between the white man and the Negro. But having had the right to make that decision, we must recognize the same right in Kentucky and every other state to make the same decision or a different one. Having fixed the policy with reference to the black, we must leave Kentucky, Missouri, Maine, and every other state perfectly free to make just such a decision as they see proper on that question. In the state of Maine, they have decided that the Negro may vote and hold office on an equality with the white man. I had occasion to say to the senators from Maine in a discussion last session that if they thought that the white people within the limits of their state were no better than Negroes, then I would not quarrel with them for it. But that they must not say that my white constituents in Illinois are no better than Negroes, or we would be sure to quarrel. I now come back to the question, why cannot this union exist forever, divided into free and slave states, as our fathers made it? It can thus exist if each state will carry out the principles upon which our institutions were founded, to wit, the right of each state to do as it pleases without meddling with its neighbors. Just act upon this great principle, and this union will not only live forever, but it will extend and expand until it covers the whole continent and makes this confederacy one grand ocean-bound republic.